Thank you for showing up today. I appreciate your taking the time away from your busy work and coming here. I think this is very important in the face of everything that is surrounding us. The chaos in Costa Mesa was an example. I'm not sure exactly where all that hatred comes from. And we're trying to break through that hatred through having conversations like this. And today I have the honor of introducing you to Eric Olson. Dr. Olson is a strategic leadership coach. He has his own firm. He calls it the Gilson Partnership. It's a global company. He goes all over the world and talks about creating transformation at various levels among executives, employees of large companies, including Coca-Cola, Viacom, Lexus, Toyota, and IBM. And his recent client is Microsoft. I've known him for just about 2 years. I've known his daughter a little bit longer, and I've been inspired by his approach to different groups. He and I participate in a non-for-profit organization. We sit on boards of that entity. Today, I'm going to have Dr. Olson present a topic about intelligent compassion. I'm going to start off with a comment made by Eckhart Tolle, the spiritual leader that you probably have heard his name mentioned in various conversations about spirituality, about the meaning of compassion. And in the wake of everything that is going on in this country and all over the world, compassion is that sense of awareness that brings us together, that brings you with all beings in this world. And it's not merely a show of empathy or sympathy towards others, but it's how we bring that sadness to the joy of being apart from that form that we exist in, this physical form, that mental form that we project to others, to ourselves, and how we can break through that and realize that beyond all of this is something deeper and more meaningful for us human beings. And that's the promise of having a connected and a deeper life, something that nothing can take that away from us. Anyway, with that, I'd like to introduce Dr. Olson.
Let me start off by saying I have teachers who are smiling. In fact, some of them are laughing at the fact that the first to arrive filled up the back of the room. Because that was my MO when I was in school, is always sit as far as possible away. You never know when there would be some kind of attack on the teacher, and you want to be as far away from the teacher as possible. So appreciate those of you who are filling my spirit and giving my teachers a sense of payback. And for those of you who arrived late, I'm sorry. So thank you for showing up on what no doubt is a crowded day. I understand your short shift, and if I had kept up my clinical license, I'd roll up my sleeves and somehow be of value added, but instead I'm just going to take up some time. But hopefully it is time that we spend together. It's going to be interactive time. I'll give you enough information to kind of prime the pump of your thinking. Then I'm going to ask you to actually do some reflection on the nature of intelligent compassion as you see it demonstrated here in your organization. And then we'll have hopefully a fairly fruitful conversation and dialogue. This conversation about intelligent compassion goes back quite a ways in my family. We have a tradition going back several generations where in the start of your career you donate time and work primarily in the nonprofit sector. So my grandfather worked as an educator and worked in India at a British American school way back in the 1920s. My father was a cardiovascular surgeon who worked with nonprofits around the world teaching open heart surgery and other techniques. And then I worked in the nonprofit sector as a clinical psychologist. And one of the things that always interested me was how you could intend to be helpful in working in that kind of environment, but create some really unpleasant, unintended consequences. My grandmother was in India with my grandfather, and she was his administrative assistant, but felt like that wasn't enough of a job for her to really fulfill. And it just so happened that at that time there was an individual named Mahatma Gandhi, who you might have heard, who was raising the consciousness of the citizens of India in terms of where their destiny lay. And he had a marvelous approach, as you well know, to nonviolent confrontation and emphasizing compassion as a key part of that work. And she got so inspired by what Mahatma Gandhi was doing that she told my grandfather, you know what, you can figure out how to run the school without me for a little while. I'm going down to see this individual and spend some time traveling around with him. Now, back in 1920s, it was not usual for wives to leave their husbands and kids behind and go travel with a gentleman who was preaching the nonviolent revolution and transformation of a country. But that's what my grandmother did. She was just that kind of person. And so she traveled around India on several trips with Mahatma Gandhi. And one of the unintended consequences of that was then shaping our family history in terms of what was okay to do in terms of taking risk, how it was okay to break certain norms and certain career parameters and say, well, actually, in the service of compassion, maybe you have to do things differently. And it's not just about simply burning out in the same old grind, but you actually have to be willing to take some risk in order to really practice intelligent compassion. So I want to talk about that. I also want to give those of you who might want to squeeze in and have a chair instead of standing, we don't mind. We're pretty informal this morning, so you're welcome to come forward. You have to say, why would we want to talk about intelligent compassion? Then what does it look like in practice? If anything's worth talking about as a value, as a behavior, then it's also worth measuring. And so we'll talk about how would you measure the presence or the absence of intelligent compassion. And then finally, what could we do about it? And this is where you get to play the home version of the game. All right? So, why intelligent compassion? Why should we talk about it? As much as anything else, because we know that caregivers easily can burn out intending to be compassionate. Can you think of friends, colleagues that you have that are not here today because in one way or another they burned out? Maybe you yourself recognize the symptoms of burnout. We're close to it. My mother was a very driven nurse. Just curious, how many nurses are here today? Okay, about half. Yeah. My mother would put most military generals to shame in terms of her organizational ability. It wasn't enough to raise 5 kids. She also needed to start schools of nursing in some of the countries where my dad would travel and set up his practice in. And so I can remember being 10 years old, arriving in Tokyo, Japan. My mother and father did not speak Japanese. My father would need to learn it so he could pass his boards, his medical boards in Japanese. And my mother, for some reason, wasn't happy with the quality of care the nurses were delivering at the hospital where my dad practiced. And so she organized a school of nursing. And that was just kind of the MO that my parents had about get in there, roll up your sleeves, and make things happen. So they were very much demonstrating intelligent compassion. But I also saw the toll it took on them to be doing so much and stretching themselves so thin. And it got me interested then when I became a psychologist in, are there ways of caring for people? But as a caregiver, you have to be smart about how you do that. And as an institution, if you are responsible for the careers of caregivers like yourself, What is the culture that you want to create in order to make the work that you do sustainable? Because it's really not very feasible to have you all come, get very excited at the beginning of your career about working here, but then just a few years later, find yourselves either mentally or physically checking out, moving to the fringes. So it's important to look at that. It's so easy to create unintended consequences when you have compassion, but you haven't thought through, if we show compassion, what might be all the ramifications of that? The most recent being, the state of California is having difficulty, and maybe some of you have heard about this, in terms of people who are legitimately handicapped being able to find parking spots. Now, I don't know about you, but sometimes I go up to a Target or to another store, and it seems like half the best parking spots in the parking lot are for handicapped people. But according to statistics, it's getting harder and harder for people who legitimately need to be in a handicapped space to be able to find that space. The reason being the DMV is incented to issue handicap placards, particularly when people come to a facility like this. They come in for a surgical procedure or other procedure. They need that placard for a period of time. But there's absolutely no incentive for the DMV to retrieve that placard once the medical need is taken away. So that's why we have 3 million placards out there, that some are being traded on eBay and other locations, because there's no incentive to pull those back. So that's an example of where, depending on how you set up incentives for compassion, you can either create a sustainable solution or you can create an unintended consequence. UNICEF has learned the hard way that you can come into a country like Ethiopia that is suffering from famine, and you can create an unintended consequences from your compassion by turning farmers from independent, though not particularly wealthy, but at least they're independent, to now aid dependent. And in the process also create a system of corruption in the government, because people know that the aid supplies that arrive are basically another form of cash. It's barter. And so a lot of organizations that mean well, NGOs and so, are having to look at how they create an unintended consequence with their compassion of, in a sense, corrupting what was a workable system before they arrived. This is now extending to things like orphanages that are looking at how they have created unintentionally separations between children and parents, simply in order to create the cycle of aid giving and compassion from developed countries. So I say that because most of us, when we go out on the floor and in our units, intend to show compassion with the best of intentions. I don't believe you're here and you come to work saying, I'm wondering how I can screw up somebody's life today. I've worked with probably 300 medical groups and hospitals over my life, had a healthcare consulting firm in Pasadena for a number of years, and we talked a lot as a team about, particularly when managed care arrived, how is it that you can intelligently care for people when the cost of that care is capitated? How can you be smart with limited resources? So people are trying to figure out ways to deliver that care as smartly as possible, but it's not always easy to know how to do that, or even ways to measure that. We've been collecting data, and by we I mean myself and my UK partner, Professor Steve Glawankowski, who 35 years ago looked at the health outcomes of people who were being supervised in workplaces. Because what we found was, if you track incidence of heart disease, there was a strong correlation between the level of disease and the type of supervision they were getting. Meaning it could literally make you ill to work for some people. Now please, do not stand up. This is not the part where you say, oh, I'd like to share a story right now about my most recent supervisor. But I don't have to even give you many seconds to think about that before you could probably flash back in your career history and say there are people you worked for that literally made you feel sick at the thought of coming to work with them. True? There are other supervisors that you've had where you actually felt energized when you clocked in. Because you said there's something about the way in which we are going to be working that is restorative. It feels like it's connected to my deeper purpose. And I'm going to be a better person, or at least have a better understanding of my work as a result of being supervised by this individual. And for me, in my work as an organizational psychologist, I'm fascinated when teams come together and have that kind of working relationship. I'm even more fascinated when you get a whole group of teams working together so that it starts to create a buzz, a brand for a place where people say, if you go on Glassdoor or some other website, wow, this is a great place to work. The culture at this place is extremely positive. They give great care, and they also care about the people who work there. Those are some of the buzzwords that I look for that tell me intelligent compassion is being practiced. So we want to talk about how do you create that for yourself personally, but I want to challenge you to be thinking collectively this morning, because we want to look at the culture and the climate of that. What we found in all these studies that we've done with hundreds of organizations is that basically intelligent compassion that makes a positive difference at work comes down to two dimensions of behavior. And this is going to be eye strain for those of you at the back of the room. You know, that's just the trade-off we have here. Basically, what we found is there's two dimensions to behavior. And you can think about this. I'd like you to imagine the best supervisor, manager, administrator you ever worked with, and begin to plot where did that individual fit. Or you might even think about the best team or unit that you ever worked with, and where did they fit on that. So one dimension is the focused passive dimension. Focused means this is behavior that really has a purpose. It's going somewhere, and it's going somewhere in a constructive direction. Passive means it's a very reactive kind of stance, waiting for something to happen. Yesterday I was on the phone with a young man whose father is head of radiology, and his father was hired as head of radiology some years after his son had already been started his work in the radiology department, 3 levels down in the organization. But HR finally caught up with them and said, hey, we just realized you're in violation of our policy that we can't have 2 family members in the same department. Well, that was actually not the correct interpretation, so we're having this conversation. And my conversation with him was, how come you're being so passive and waiting until HR decides your fate? I said, it seems to me like you should at least be talking to somebody, a legal expert who could take a look at the actual clause that HR is talking about, see whether or not that applies to you. And so I'm always curious about how we create either a focused, proactive direction to where we're going, or we can find ourselves in a passive way. So again, if you think of yourself in your relationship to a supervisor or a team, think of a time in which you were part of a very focused, proactive, going in the right direction kind of team, or going in the other direction, just sitting back, kind of feeling victimized, basically. So that's one key dimension that we found to intelligent compassion. The second dimension was compassion on one end versus indifference towards others on the other end. Okay. I once was called in to coach a group of executives who were so at each other's throat. My colleague and I, after about 6 hours with them, took a break and said, this is so bad, I think we should nickname them Team Piranha, because they seem determined to cannibalize and just chew themselves to pieces. Now, it's terrible when you have to work in an environment like that, because you just come to work and you feel like you've got to protect yourself. There's nothing that feels warm, fuzzy, open. It just feels like you're on your guard. On the other hand, when you work in a place where compassion is found, somehow it changes your mental energy, your spiritual energy, your physical energy. You just sense that something is going right. So when we put this together, what we find is there's basically 4 quadrants. You know, this is the quadrant that everybody would love to say they belong to, because people are assertive without being aggressive. They're flexible, they seek information, they're results-minded, and they involve others. No. And what's fascinating to me is when I find teams like this. I'm about to meet a group in the Midwest that has a reputation for working like this. And even though they're in a part of the Midwest that is not desirable in terms of normally people would want to do their medical careers there, they're having huge success in being able to attract people to leave places like California, Oregon, New York, Florida, and come to a little town in the Midwest because they are so committed to creating teams and organization that looks like this. And they have word of mouth that spreads that says, even though this is not the biggest, highest profile market to work in, it's absolutely a fantastic place. You just feel younger when you work here. So there's a lot of plus when you can say that you work for an organization that has these characteristics. It's not so positive when you work for an organization that is what we call red one. That is where people are very clear on the direction they're going, but they're absolutely indifferent to how others feel about it. This is the supervisor whose nickname might be My Way or the Highway. Maybe you have worked for an individual like that, you know? You start to say, here's what I think we should be doing, and they say, thank you for your opinion. When I want it, I'll ask for it. That's your clue. Okay, this is the kind of leadership that I'm going to get. Probably might be very smart, so we've got the intelligent part, not so good on the compassion part. On the other hand, you might have worked for somebody who is really strong on the compassion part, but has no clue as to what direction to go. Now, this is a real problem in healthcare, because you have people who are so well-meaning, so generous in their heart and wanting to care, but issues like budget, resources, timelines escape them. And so there's a lot of rework that gets done, a lot of second guessing that gets done, a lot of burnout, a lot of confusion in terms of what is it that we're really trying to accomplish, and are we working in the smartest way possible? Neither one of these two areas is particularly fun to be working in over a long period of time, and they do tend to create low performance, low morale, and burnout. The third option over here is the individual who has said, I am so tired for working for this raving maniac, you know, this red one personality. I'm also unhappy working for granola, singing Kumbaya, but not feeling like we're going anywhere. So I'm just going to keep my head down and lie low and hope to God somehow somebody comes along and has some sense and takes us in the right direction and takes us with them. But in the meantime, I'm just going to be detached. I'm going to lie back. This is what we call the passive-aggressive behavior, right? Just, you know, I'll say one thing, I'll show up to meetings, but I'm going to keep my head down and just survive. So you can see how in an organization, if people are hanging out in the red, amber, or green quadrants, compassion might be present, but it's in a diluted form. It's not in a way that inspires confidence, makes people feel like coming to work is just one of the best parts of life. So my challenge to you is not to be a victim, but actually, now that you know that there's tremendous research and practice, healthcare and other industries saying that if you can increase this by even 10%, you see a fantastic shift in the way people feel about coming to work. So how do we measure that coming to work and feeling better? One is we can measure the degree to which that blue 4 is present. I'm currently working with an academic medical center, and one of the things that they've decided after they got their scores and saw their results is that they had way too many people who were in red, green, and amber. And so their commitment is how we're going to, over the next year, increase this kind of behavior by 10%. And we'll take 10% from these three areas and shift it there. And then they're going to apply it in a very specific way. So I'll come back to them. But that's a thing that to me is really fascinating when people say, rather than sitting back and being passive, I'm going to actually get engaged in figuring out how do I and as members of my team move in that direction. Second thing is you can look at the way in which your team, you fit into the larger organization. Now, this next slide is dangerous to show at 9 o'clock in the morning because it's got more information than you ever want to know about how organizations work. But this is where I live. I was just telling you about behaviors. Behaviors is what you show up with every day that you come here. And it's the most visible way we have to know whether you're checked in or you're checked out, whether the compassion that you have is smart or it's just going through the motions. What's really important is to notice how does that influence the way work gets done. Have you noticed that it takes more people, more effort to get the same task done when people aren't engaged? When people are engaged, it takes fewer people to get the work done because people are just stepping in to help each other out. They're not drawing the lines and saying, I couldn't possibly do that. No, they're looking for ways to help. So how you design work has a great deal to do with how you behave. The processes that you follow. I once had a health system up in Central California, the Community Medical Center in Fresno, that the nursing department decided they couldn't wait for administration to figure out how they were going to be dealing with indigent and prisoner care, because the old model of delivering care wasn't going to work given the cost structure. So they took it upon themselves to say, let's design processes that serve our new and expanded patient population. And so it was kind of a ground-up approach to changing the process of care that was done very intelligently with costs in mind, but really with a different and very diverse population to serve. It was a fabulous experience as well as you watch the administration kind of come around over a 2-year period and realize actually our top-down approach is not in sync with the needs of the population that we're serving, and making that a constructive dialogue. When you look at all three of these things, processes, behaviors, and organizational design, what they really do is they describe the culture. So I don't know, if I were to ask you, how would you describe the culture of this place? What words come to mind? Okay, a very silent, meditative place, that's one.
I'm in the red zone today, so I don't know if you really...
As your suit is, well,
yeah.
Thank you for giving us that warning, by the way.
I'm trying.
Yeah. Once worked for a administrator who was so volatile, he was a red one, his admin had a wooden duck on her desk. If the wooden duck was facing north, that meant it's okay to go in. If the wooden duck was turned facing south, it was enter at your own risk. So you at least give us heads up by knowing if you're wearing a red suit today, fair game. All right. Friendly comes to mind. So when you think about the way in which people behave, the way in which they design work with each other, and the way in which they create processes for work to get done, it somehow feels like there's a friendly spirit to that work for you. Fabulous. What other words come to mind? And we don't need to be all Pollyanna. There may be some challenging words. That's okay. We're big boys and girls.
Don't be afraid to speak that. I can leave.
So here's what I'm going to ask. Here's what I'm going to ask you to do. This is where the home version gets played. All right. You're sitting next to somebody who's really intelligent. Then you're sitting next to somebody who isn't really intelligent. I don't know which one that is, so you're going to have to figure it out. What I'd like you to do is in groups of 2 or 3, would you simply do a little brainstorm? When you think of the culture of this place, what are some of the words that other people probably use to describe this place? All right, just 2 or 3 people, no more than 2 or 3, because then it gets too large. Just a little bit, but one of the things I'm going to ask you to do is keep in mind the words that you are hearing your colleagues use. And ask yourself if those words were really true about how work gets done around here. Because that's what we mean by culture, how work gets done. Would this be an organization that is on path, on track, to really deliver outstanding compassion, not only to patients, but also to staff, and to do so in an intelligent way? And by intelligent, I mean it actually thinks about the economic, the emotional, the physical consequences of how care gets delivered, and does so then in a way that is sustainable, not just simply for the short term. So there's a couple of things that I really want you to be thinking about in that conversation that you had about culture, because how work gets done has a huge impact on how we feel about that work. Would you agree? If work is done, let's say you have a culture that's efficient or friendly, how you feel is directly impacted by how that work gets done. I'm beginning to do some work with Dr. Paul Zak. He teaches at Claremont Graduate School of Business. And Paul is a marvelous neuroscience researcher who has for 10 years studied a neurochemical response that the body has when presented with a culture that is positive. And he actually can measure that with the neurochemical oxytocin. And oxytocin is present in elevated ways when we are in an environment that feels safe and trustworthy. So if we create a culture of intelligent compassion, one of the things that we know from a neurochemical point of view is around this facility there will be more oxytocin present than if you didn't have that. Now, short of putting swabs in all your noses this morning to be able to detect the level of oxytocin, we have to resort to other means. So what I'm going to do in just a second is give you a chance to rate the degree to which it feels like there is a culture of intelligent compassion. And we call this feeling a climate. On the way down this morning, I live out in Redlands, but I listen to the radio for traffic and weather, and it's all about the change, the highs, the low, the onshore flows, the Santa Anas. That's climate. It shifts, it changes. And we make our plans accordingly. So how you feel about the way in which work gets organized here is incredibly important, because it then is a barometer of your energy level. High, blue 4, intelligent compassion means you're likely to feel more positive and thereby have more energy. Let me pass this out. Each of you, I hope you have somebody with a pen or pencil nearby you. If not, you're going to have to use some mathematical skills. Just pass this around. Of a climate of intelligent compassion. What I would like you to do as we go through each one is don't agonize over it, don't obsess over it. You will not be graded on a curve afterwards, but simply on a scale of 1 to 10, 1 being I don't think this is present in our organization at all, to 10, we're world class. We should be featured on the cover of Modern Healthcare because we do this so well. All right. I want you to just quickly give that dimension a score from 1 to 10. Mark that, and then we'll go on to the next one. Now, there's subdimensions on each of these. If we had more time, we'd spend giving scores to the subdimension, but we are not going to do that today. So you're just going to give an overall score to each dimension. So the first one is clarity. That is the extent to which people understand the long-term direction of where the organization is trying to go. You're able to see the alignment of your own and your colleagues' activities because of that long-term direction. You have a clear sense of drive, focus, and the way forward. So people come and they know 2 years from now, where does the organization say it wants to be in terms of services offered, career development, serving the community. Those things are really clear. The purpose, the mission, the values. So if you would, just a kind of a gut check reaction, where would you place the organization on a scale of 1 to 10? Give it a number, please. All right, you got the number written down? Let's move on. The second one, challenge, the level to which people feel that objectives are truly stretching but attainable. Cultivating a drive for excellence. You're encouraged to try new approaches and take calculated risks. Somebody doesn't show up for their shift duty. Now there's a stretch. How do 5 of you accomplish the work of 6? This is a perfect example of a challenge. Or there's enough people, but now suddenly there's an emergency. There's a sudden influx of need. How do you stretch to deal with that sudden influx of need? So again, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate the organization in its response? 3, change orientation. Change orientation. The sense of how well the organization responds to change, to what extent people are enthusiastic and ready to embrace change. Unnecessary procedures are kept to a minimum. People are prepared to question well-established ways of doing things. Remember I told you about that nursing department that said we've got to shift the way in which we're responding to care because we've now taken on indigent populations, prison populations. They were really high in their change orientation score. So where would you place your organization? All right? Good. Let's keep moving on. Flip the page over. For some of you, that will be a major change that you weren't expecting to turn it over, but we'll do the best. Autonomy, the extent to which people are able to get on with their job, take decisions without checking with their boss. They feel accountable for the outcomes of their work, prepared to operate outside the strict remit or responsibilities of the role to deliver results. This is a very tricky one sometimes. And again, it goes back to the culture, how things get done around here. So the degree to which you have autonomy to do your job on a scale of 1 to 10. All right? I'm not giving you a lot of time to agonize, so some of you will be frustrated with me, others of you will be racing ahead. Recognition, the degree to which reward is directly and differentially related to performance. In other words, if you really perform in an outstanding way, you notice it. It gets rewarded. People know how well they are doing and feel that their contribution is valued and appreciated. No, it's not possible to give it a negative one.
Possible.
Yeah, it just won't count. Yeah. Okay? Good, moving on. Involvement, the level of importance that is attributed to the role of the team. There is a shared commitment, sense of alignment to team goals. There is trust amongst the team, pride in being part of the team, a clear sense that incremental value is added by working as a team. Again, a number between 1 and 10. All right, here's what I need you to do. Yes?
Did you want us to rate each subdivision
No.
individually or all three?
Just one score for involvement. Yeah. If this was an advanced class, would do just what you suggested. Okay. All right. Here's what I need you to do. First of all, your math skills will be tested by adding up the backside page and find the total for the 3 that were on the backside. Then flip it over. Do the same for the front side. Page number. With me so far? Fabulous. Even for Friday morning. That's good. So here's what I need you to do. How many of you have a front page score that is highest? Higher than the back page. Front page is higher than the back page. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. Those of you who the back page is higher. Okay, that's everybody else, which is about 2/3. So it's about 1/3 front page, 2/3. The 6 dimensions of climate are divided along the 2 dimensions of the behavior model. So things like change orientation, challenge, and clarity are all about how an organization is doing in creating a climate where you have a clear sense of the direction. Flip the page over. It's all about the ways in which the organization works to create a feeling of intelligent compassion, with the emphasis on compassion. So if I have autonomy, if there's recognition, if I feel like my team is involved, those all have to do with a form of compassion that is expressed at an organizational level. The reason why that's important is that gets translated through you and how you feel to patients and their families. So it's a direct connection between how the organization as a whole is doing its work that makes you feel a certain way, and then how you feel has an influence on whether or not patients and their family perceive that this is a place where intelligent compassion is practiced. Does that make sense? Yeah. So what I always am curious about is this a place where the front side is stronger than the back side? And just a rough polling here today says, yeah, we're clear about how we engage, not so clear about the direction. Because the back page was higher. I'm curious, on the back page, how many of you had autonomy as the highest of the three? Only about 2 or 3. How many of you had involvement as the highest on the back page? And how many of you had recognition? Congratulations. I want to recognize you.
It was clearly recognized and unrecognizable.
Yeah, so one of the things that we could have a lot of not only fun, but actually some productive conversation around is, so what might there be about recognition that makes this such a challenging dimension about the climate here? If you would just go back into your groups of 2 or 3 and not play a victim, but say, okay, I'm now in a role of being a change agent. What's one practical thing that I could suggest about the climate of recognition that would be practical, intelligent, but would actually make a difference in terms of how people feel? Would you just, Congress, with the 2 or 3 people you were with, what's one practical thing you could do around recognition? So this is the part where you educate me. What was an idea that you heard in your small group that you said, all right, now that actually would be a great idea? It doesn't have to be your own idea. It could be something that you heard from somebody else. What was something you heard that you said, that's a great idea? Yes.
Oh, I don't know if I can talk about it.
Do you want us all to plug our ears?
You take this, I am not administration at the moment.
There you go.
I was thinking,
There was a raise in certain departments,
Okay.
but it didn't go to all the departments. He said, oh, I should have gone to all the departments. Yeah, good idea, I should have gone, or maybe we wouldn't have had such an influx out.
Okay.
yeah.
So that's a perfect example of how the backside of the page, which is about a raise that was distributed to some but not all, has to be understood in terms of the front side of the page, meaning what direction are we going into? Why was the raise allocated in this way? How did it serve the long-term direction that we're going? And right now it doesn't sound like it was clear as to why it was done that way. Would that be fair to say?
Yes, very much so. It was cloudy.
Yeah.
Some people thought they knew exactly why,
What?
because it was for a very specific chest pain, open heart, that kind of thing, that kind of route that a patient would take. That's where the raises came, but they also will be involved with those patients eventually,
Okay.
as they get better.
Right. So there was, thank you for bringing up, because that's a wonderful example. We don't have time, but I have a slide up of a pulmonary critical care group I'm working with and their climate. And 3 things were low. Recognition, surprise. Clarity was also really low. And the 2 actually went together, because when people were not clear about why certain recognition, reward, involvement schemes were being done the way they were and how that linked to the overall direction, it actually was almost worse than not doing anything. Because people just got then confused about, so why this and not that? So that's really an important thing, and I'm not judging at all, because I'm not here, so I don't know. I'm just saying I see this time and time again, where the intent has to be really clearly understood in terms of why is this being done, how does it serve our long-term direction. Good. What else did you hear? Thank you for, what else did you hear as a good idea? Yes?
Our most recognized person here says that they complement each other on a good job that they do. You know, if they do, you know, when they do a job, that they complement each other.
So you actually have team members that will be verbal, and yeah, huge. It's kind of funny because when I was a psychologist before I moved into organizational work, I worked with couples, and we used to be able to count the number of positive to negative interactions and predict the likelihood of divorce. And basically, it was you needed a 7-to-1 positive to negative ratio in order to say this couple has a chance of really pulling together. Teams are no different. You need that positive to negative ratio in order to feel like coming to work is an energizing positive thing. So I'm glad you picked up on that. One more idea. Let's pick up one more idea from the advanced learners at the back of the room. What was an idea back there? If you could speak just loud enough so we...
Recognize within a department very well, but not higher up.
So it sounds like a bit of a step gap then.
Yes,
Yeah.
by corporate
Yeah.
versus in our department.
And so if I come back to my example I gave about the nursing department that took basically a ground-up approach to instituting change, one of the things we might have fun doing with a little bit more time, but you certainly have my permission to play with this when you go back into your team discussions, is how might we elevate this? How might we bridge that gap between administration and our concerns? What is the channel that we can use? That's a really important step to take in order to not be in that amber quadrant of passive and indifferent. Again, the whole idea is the more those of us who are in this room can move into that blue quadrant where we are smart about the direction we're going, but we're also incredibly compassionate towards one another, the better the culture of this place will be in terms of how things get done, and the climate, meaning how we feel, will also be more positive. The net result is we and the patients we serve have a demonstrated chance of being better. In fact, we've done this so much that we see a 10, 20, 40 rule, meaning a 10% change in behavior away from that angry red one to the distant removed yellow to the really agreeable but highly confused green to a very clearly intelligent, compassionate blue 4. A 10% difference there makes a 20% difference in a positive way in terms of the climate. This work that people will say, I feel better about working here, 20% more. It has then a 40% positive impact on all performance measures. So not just financial, but also in terms of certain health outcomes, retention, drop in absenteeism. It's become almost a rule for us that if we can get that 10% shift in behavior, there's a downstream multiplier effect. So I guess I will leave you with the idea that practicing intelligent compassion begins with you. It can easily expand by members of your team deciding they too want to practice that intelligent compassion. Then that becomes something that is a platform for a larger organizational conversation. Don't we want to come to work at a place that demonstrates this kind of compassion in a smart way with a clear direction, that we all wind up feeling more constructive, more positive as a result of that? If nothing else, I hope that the time that we've spent here gives you some ideas about how you could start to apply that in a very practical way. It's been done by thousands of people, and I just feel so honored that you and I get to have this conversation and talk about how might that begin to get started here. And I truly wish you all the best as you go back into the stretch and challenge jobs that you have for the rest of the day. Thank you very much.
I want to thank Dr. Olson for giving us the really valuable time to come here and this early morning to start with a very beautifully presented subject. And I know over last year we always talked about as part of the message of PHPEP about changing the culture, and it was just amazing that this concept was talked about today. So you know, the culture, it's very hard to change it, and it takes many, many years. And but it starts with every individual. And I think if we follow the same concept of intelligent compassion, I think we will have a very clear idea of where we wanted to go. And I'm sure 100% that every one of us wanted to come to work and enjoy the work, and that day be one of the best day of our life, every day. But unfortunately, when we come in, we get a lot of disappointment, obviously. But at the end of the day, every one of us is responsible to be part of that intelligent compassion. And I hope this conversation that we had today, this presentation, would be another lesson for us for going forwards. And I really thank again Dr. Olson to come here, and thank Dr. Hami to arrange that meeting, and also all of you guys to be here. Thank you so much.